Good afternoon, dear colleagues and friends. I'm glad to welcome you on our meeting, Experience of Working with Forced Migrants, Georgia. My name is Nazarii, Boiarskyi. I represent Ukrainian NGO Democratic Initiatives Incubator, and I will be happy to co-moderate this event. Our meeting is conducted by the NGO Democratic Initiatives Incubator from Ukraine within the framework of the project The Response of Citizenship Education to the Challenges of Forced Migration, which is implemented by the working group of EENCE network. Citizenship Education and Forced Migration, supported by the Federal Agency for Civil Education, using funds appropriated by the Federal Foreign Office, Germany. And this event is held for interested people from the Eastern Partnership countries, and this is part of a series of meetings dedicated to the experience of working with forced migrants from different countries. And you already can find our recording from previous events, which was dedicated to the experience of Armenia, Moldova, Lithuania, Poland, Germany, and some other countries. And today it's time to talk about Georgian experience. So with this, I would like to represent my moderator, Natalie. She is represent Eastern European Network for Citizenship Education, as well as Civil Education Teachers Forum of Georgia.
Thank you, Nazarii, for introduction, and thank you everyone for joining us. First of all, before I present our guest speaker today, I want to remind you that our meeting is recorded. So if you wish not to be shown in the recording, please keep your cameras off. Otherwise, we welcome you to have your cameras on, and we encourage you to ask questions throughout the discussion. So today, I'm honored to present our guest speaker, Dimitri Zviadadze, who is an area manager in one of the biggest organizations working in the forced migration sphere, that is Norwegian Refugee Council, and he's right now working in Syria. I also invite you, Dimitri, to present yourself. That is even better if you do that. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Natalie, Nazarii, and I wish us successful stream. First of all, I would like to highlight that although it's very correct, I'm working currently for Norwegian Refugee Council in Syria, but I've been working with the internal displacement in Georgia since 2000, and actually from 2000 to uninterruptedly up to 2014. And then intermittently as well, between the overseas missions. But I just want to highlight that I'm not representing right now the Norwegian Refugee Council. So I'm speaking as the one of the Georgians who work with displacement in Georgia, and even with the fellow colleagues from the civil society sector in Georgia, kind of co-founded and they worked with the Consortium Legal Aid Georgia for some years, which is, I do hope, sincerely quite well known among the practitioners, specifically in the legal field. So I'll be sharing some experiences about working with displacement in Georgia from that time. Yeah, thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Dimitri. I think it is clear why Georgian people, citizens are willing to speak and share information about internal displacement, because we have this, actually not willingly, but we have the practice working with internal displaced people. So it is also important for other country representatives, especially from Eastern Partnership, how they started in Georgia. What is the background of starting working with internal displaced people?
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. Yeah, well, that's what you are presenting now. It's kind of the few slides. So we put just to present some basic facts and figures and some the processes and involvement of the response to the internal displacement in Georgia. So this is kind of outline of our today's discussion. But feel free to deviate and ask more specific questions or ask to elaborate on a particular topic.
Right.
I think it might be interesting for our guests to start with some background and the facts and the figures to highlight. I mean, the conflict, internal ethnic conflicts actually, which led to internal displacement in Georgia, happened first in early 90s, shortly after Georgia regained the independence. So the conflict, which lasted in 1991, from 1991 to 1993, in Autonomous Republic of Abkhazia, which was like inseparable part of Georgia, was and is, I believe, but also in autonomous district of South Ossetia. So shortly, we'll refer it to as Abkhazia and South Ossetia. Although currently the official, actually the authorities are using term Tskhinvali region instead of South Ossetia. So yeah, we might be using those terms interchangeably. So those conflicts generated quite a large number of people, mostly ethnic Georgians, being displaced. We are talking about roughly 300,000 people. The figures fluctuate because there was quite a big immigration. A lot of people left Georgia. I mean, I'm speaking about the IDPs, but still within Georgia at the moment, there are, you see figures there, like 286,000 more than that people still registered as IDPs. And I'm saying registered because the state kind of keeps counting, and it has some legal connotation as well, because Georgia applies and the grants our IDPs the legal status. So the IDP status in Georgia is a legal status. So unfortunately, and by the way, this is pretty similar to what Ukraine did. So you also have legislation, governing legislation, which grants the legal status to IDPs. So displacement in Georgia, unfortunately, characterized as protracted or frozen because it's last 29 years already, and there is no prospects of the political solution to this conflict at the moment so far, right? I forgot to mention that we had another conflict, like a brief war in August 2008, when Russian Federation invaded Georgia, Tskhinvali region, and which generated some additional caseload of IDPs, right? Originally, it was like more than 120,000, but then in displacement remains still from 22 to 25,000 IDPs from Tskhinvali region, like a new caseload. So speaking about the IDPs, it usually referred as the old caseload, the people displaced in 90s, and the new caseload, people displaced in 2008.
This all led to the international organizations as well to intervene and jump and somehow provide aid to country in need. That was Georgia at the time. Can you share some brief examples of what happened after those conflicts and after those waves of displacement in Georgia?
Yep. So it's in a way the processes evolving in Georgia were quite similar to what was happening in Ukraine in 2014, 2015. I think the big difference was that back then in 90s, it was happening in the era when there was no internet and there was no social media and there was the means of communication were not developed so far that that conflict was not known to the vast majority of the mankind, so to say, right? Unlike what was happening in Ukraine. I mean, again, not to speaking about the size, because Ukraine is the huge country and the higher lot, you know, like the people displaced there, like in numbers, it can't be even compared with Georgia. But just keep in mind the entire Georgia's population is less than 4 million now, I think 3.5, and having roughly 300,000 IDPs is like how much would be that? Like almost a 10% of population, which is quite a big ratio. And in the situation in the early 90s, where the country and the state institution, I just remind that it was shortly after regaining independence, were quite weak, and the country was not in position to respond to that crisis. Well, actually, we didn't have an experience, we didn't know how to, and we didn't have a means to respond it. So the people were displaced and resettled in Georgia proper, in the other regions, very much spontaneously, and like there was not in very organized way. So we ended up to have roughly half, maybe 45% to be more precise, like a IDP population accommodating, finding shelter in the so-called collective centers, which were mostly either public buildings like the hotels, sanatoriums, administrative buildings, kindergartens, or the buildings which were in the collective centers, which were in a private ownerships, like belong to different companies or the individuals. So the other half of the displaced population, they found the refuge in private sector. They've been renting, who can afford that. They've been staying with their families, relatives, and similar. So in Georgia, there is very strong like a family and family ties, and the people would kind of extend the support. But then considering the overall like economic hardship which we had in the country like in the early 90s, so it was becoming difficult for the host families to keep supporting the IDPs with the housing, right? And not only with housing, but with the, getting the everyday bread. So that was leading to often the secondary displacements when people had to, okay, maybe not forced as such, but the people had to move. Yeah. So among the IDP population, we had like a very high internal migration rates. What I mean that the people came from Abkhazia, settled in one city, and then 6 months later, they cannot sustain themselves there. So they had to move to another place and move to another place. And that would continue like as a vicious circle. I mean, in terms of support being provided, I mean, there have been a lot of international organizations, the UN agencies arriving to Georgia at that time and extending the support in a different fields. But that kind of support, I mean, as I'm sure the Ukrainian colleagues and fellows can confirm, irrespective of the size and volume, it's never enough, right? So you can never probably satisfy the needs of the all displaced and, you know, like when we speak about the hundreds of thousands of people. So, I mean, I had personally kind of pleasure and honor to join Norwegian Refugee Council back in 2000. And from 2000 to 2014, early 2014, I worked through various programs, but mainly the programs which has like more like a legal direction, providing information, counseling, legal assistance to IDPs through our ICLA program at the time. But also there were like a lot of different programs. It would be the education program, shelter programs, providing housing options and the support. And there were many others like like-minded and similar organizations from all over the world. That all being led also by the coordinated UN support in country, which is still present, although on much lower scale, smaller scale, because a lot of agencies, they left Georgia at some point because of the emerging crises around the world, yeah, which is kind of a natural evolution. Unfortunately, the fact that the conflict, as I mentioned earlier, is protracted and is kind of, you know, like it's not such a clear understanding what will be the outcome of all of that. It's made a lot of organizations to kind of exit Georgia, but also I have to be fair here and to give kind of credit to the government who managed, let's say, starting from, especially after the other war we had in 2008, managed to kind of consolidate and consolidate international support through the various donor conferences. So like a more funding were allocated to Georgia to support with the internal displacement. And a lot of actual housing programs have been implemented since then. We can speak about more in details later if you are interested about it, but through the numerous housing programs implemented, a lot of IDP households have been provided with the decent housing and which was transferred into ownership. Yeah, that's very important to highlight. And this is not the case which you can see in many other countries where like a governments are struggling with internal displacement. So in Georgia, the government made the deliberate decision to informed decision to provide the housing as a durable solution into the ownership, right? Even though that was not per se the requirement of international legislation or whatever, right? So, but kind of the standard was set quite high, and up until now the figures differ. But it's like like from 25 to up to 40,000 families have been provided with housing solution one sort or another. I mean, of course, we can speak about whether all those housing solutions have been, like a really real solutions, or the proper or the quality of the housing provided was always equally good. Yeah, there were a lot of challenges with that. And again, we can speak about it more in details if you're interested. But overall, we can say that, there was a consolidated response by the government, which also contributed to the fact that a lot of international support actually was withdrawn from Georgia and kind of refocused to the other conflicts in the world, which were less responded at the time. Let me stop here and give floor to you. So.
Dimitri, you touched a very important aspect of, about housing, because we have like a different types of housing and livelihood offers from the government. And just listening to you, I remembered after war in 2008, my school became a shelter for IDPs for a couple of months. The school remains still closed after that fact, because it was damaged and there was like a lot of problems around it, but very unclear. Everyone always wanted like those space, so it is another story for another day. But I remember the community attitude towards the internal displaced people coming in our district in Sanzona. It is very small, very like outskirts of the city, and everyone were greeting people coming from Gori region and Tskin Valley region. And just a matter of fact, another day I was walking by to the school, and people are still living there. Those people who came in 2008, they are still living in the school building, which has like nothing in it, like no proper amenities, nothing. So I know that government aims a lot, and also like has a program that has its scale kind of. You need to meet the criteria who are mostly in need of housing, and then you get the house. So I still think this is like a good step forward, that government helps people get housing solutions, but at the same time, we still have like a lot of people in need. That is what I'm trying to say. And it is a complex thing as well. It is not that easy to look because we also have the status of being an internal displaced person. So if you allow me, I want us to jump on the topic, how it is legally, like how people remain or maintain the status of being IDPs, and what that means in the end. So should we just like jump a bit in that like a point, and then come back to the housing arrangements and what types of housing we offer as a country? Thank you.
Sure, and thanks for bringing your personal example, or the story of being acquainted with the IDPs in your household, in your neighborhood, which is typical, I believe, for every Georgian by now, because one way or another, we all have seen IDPs, like in our neighborhood, in our communities, in our cities, in urban, rural areas, doesn't matter where. Even though majority of IDPs, I think 80%, if not mistaken, are still living in urban areas. So back to the status. Even though displacement happened in '93, the first actually law on internally displaced persons persecuted the government adopted back in 1996. So it was quite advanced at the time because, I mean, if you kind of compare with the many other countries where the policy framework or the legal framework were not regulated like for a long time, that kind of response was like put in place quite early. But then the government decided through the law to establish that legal status. So the people were registered and were granted the IDP status, which they hold up until now. So that status is, I mean, it can be revoked or can be suspended under certain conditions. Yeah, for example, if you acquire the citizenship of the other country, or you can lose your IDP status, or if you leave Georgia for more than 2 months, your status will be suspended. Well, until you come back and you kind of reclaim it to be reactivated. But that, as a matter of principle, if you keep living in Georgia, and then irrespective whether you receive the housing or not, you can maintain your IDP status. So I mean, the different studies or the different like polls kind of confirms that for people, even if it's linked with a certain benefits, and we can speak about it later, for people it's often kind of the substitute, not substitute, but represents their connection with the homeland, right, or with the area where they're coming from. So they don't want to lose that, right? So that has very much emotional kind of dimension to keeping that status. Even though, again, like no international legislation obliged the country first to give the legal status and then to revoke the legal status. Quite in opposite, actually. In a way, it's a little bit kind of contradicts to the essence of the so the concept of a durable solutions to be mentioned here, because it's believed that, okay, when the person has no longer displacement related needs, he shouldn't be considered IDP anymore, right? But in Georgia, being IDP, it's not only just factual state that, you know, you've been displaced at some point in time, but it's also the legal status. So that two things are not separated. And that's why, let's say, starting canceling the IDP status is now in Georgia for people who acquire the, let's say, proper housing or have a proper jobs and don't have any specific needs related to displacement. One would consider this as something a logical, you know, conclusion or logical end up of your displacement, the status. But no, that doesn't happen, because I think the government here also made it very clear that it's kind of a political, it probably has more political connotation to keep it that way. Even though I have to say that over the last several years, there was like a big call for the reform of the IDP status linked assistance. So there was a call to delink whatever the support people get just because they have an IDP status, to make it not a status based but a needs based. So actually, those who are in a real need still, like people in your neighborhood living in the school, they shall remain to be eligible for the support. But those IDPs who, as I said, like a relatively well established now or well reconnected with the rest of the society, even though in displacement, they don't need to be getting the type of assistance the state provides. So maybe that's a very big that used to be an attempt to do a very big reform, which so far has not materialized. Although there was like a lot of human and the kind of the resources and the time and energy put into that, developing the scenarios, how those two things can be delinked, status from the assistance. But let's put this aside and get back to the actual the benefits which are linked with the status, and which I think you also implied in your question. So if you are a holder of IDP status, you are automatically entitled to receive a monthly financial assistance, which is not big, it's quite a nominal, but still like a 45 Georgian lari, which it's less than $20, like $17 maybe, but it's given per person, and it's given on a monthly basis. So which means that if you have a family of 5, so if you have a newborn baby, the babies are once they get registered, so you have this kind of it's your responsibility to register your baby as the IDP. And that's another interesting dimension here. In Georgia, IDP status can be in a way inherited. So if you are an IDP yourself, your baby born already in displacement can claim for the IDP status and will be granted the IDP status. And let me tell you even more, not only if both parents are IDPs, but even if one parent is an IDP only and one is non-IDP, there are a lot of marriages, of course, over these 29 years between the IDPs and non-IDPs, right? So even if one parent is an IDP, the child can be receiving the IDP status and related benefits. So, and back to the benefits, 45 lari, the monthly financial assistance. There is a, I can't say that there are more like types of assistance which you can receive like regularly, but there are types of assistance which you can claim. For instance, one-time financial assistance the family can claim if they have the different kind of emergencies. As an example, a medical emergency, right? There might be temporary renting subsidies. So the state will help to pay your rent for a certain period of time if you are under the risk of being homeless, right? But then this is like up to 6 months only, and then this assistance will be withdrawn. Although the same family can reclaim the same assistance certain period after, right? So it's not permanent, it's not durable, let's say, but it's still some type of support for the people in a desperate need for a home. Most importantly, you can claim as an IDP, so your IDP status is an absolute precondition for claiming the housing assistance, right? And when talking about housing, we can say both actually about the temporary housing that you can give, you can be given not only the renting subsidies, but the actual housing as a temporary solution, but also you can be given what is called in Georgia as a durable housing. So there is such a notion of that term in the Georgian legislation, in the latest version of the law, which was like significantly updated in 2014, and which introduced this notion of the durable housing. And that housing which is given to you, it's supposed to be in a good shape, in a decent, enough space and the facilities, everything, and it will be given to you as an ownership. Again, it's far not as easy process as it sounds. It's not as like a blue and like the pink and all the kind of the nice and easy, because a lot of people complained about the quality of the housing being provided, because there are different types of the housing which can be provided as a durable housing. And I see you kind of put the slide there. So speaking about, do you want me to kind of elaborate on the type of housings, or we kind of keep it for and I'll get back to you.
I think it is also like important, as a matter of fact, to mention what type of housing Georgia offers to IDPs, because there are several types and they differ. And it is also like important because we want to somehow like jump to the point where we start talking about integration, and also it is important to see how people live first of all, and then continue on that. But I also I want to encourage our audience to ask questions in the chat, or just use your emojis and reactions in the Zoom chat. So we will give you the word. So questions welcome always, and Dimitri, now I will let you continue on that topic.
Okay, I think you mentioned the super important thing, the concept of the integration. Maybe we just need to do a little jump back to the history in 90s and early 2000s. So when the only real and foreseeable solution to displacement was perceived to be return. And that was the opinion not only about among the IDP community or IDP population themselves, but first of all in the government. And why it's super important to remember that and to kind of acknowledge the shift from that perception. So when you have in mind that you're gonna be returning like tomorrow or the day after tomorrow, and which was like an expectation, unfortunately non-realistic as time shown back then. So you don't really try to kind of establish yourself or just to get integrated, or if you are the authority in charge, like a governmental body, which is in charge for, like helping IDPs or dealing with IDPs, whatever you do, right, in your planning and your like policies you do or policies you implement, it all aims to ultimately like a return, and which means that there is no room actually to think of how to improve the actual living conditions and the life of people in displacement. So I remember at the time there was no even talk about the local integration, or when the local integration came as not the replacement for return, yeah, don't get me wrong, but as an alternative, and until the return would be possible. So I remember that at the time, like late 90s or early 2000, that was like quite negatively received by the authorities, because they saw that no, how can you speak about like a local integration? We are thinking about return, and all that rhetoric, which was more like a politically driven and without any economic or like the real background behind it. So that's why it's important to highlight that the document which government adopted back in 2007, it was a state strategy for IDPs. It was the first policy document. I mean, I think you can show it on the earlier slides, the one before that. That document actually presented as a shift in the policy, or the shift in minds, I would say, right? How we start looking at the displacement problem in Georgia. So local integration was acknowledged as one of the objectives of the strategy, and but of course it had this kind of a mentioning that facilitate local integration for IDPs until return become possible, right? So return is never being kind of removed from the options, but until it's possible, until there are conditions for the dignified and the safe return of people into the places of their origin, we can speak about the local integration. So since that moment, we can speak of the actual the move when the government started really do something for people to improve, like significantly improve their living conditions and support their integration, right? So that word doesn't stay as a buzzword, but the actual has a meaning behind. So, but the integration is such a wide term, so it includes like not only housing. Housing is just one of the components, even though it's like a hard component, that most visible, tangible, and probably most expensive one. But besides that, we need to speak about like livelihoods, access to services, equal access to services with the rest of the population, the equal access to rights, all of that. Although I have to say that in terms of the equal access to rights, there almost never been a kind of a big difference or a discrimination of the IDP population, except maybe the first years where the IDPs could not really exercise their the passive voting rights, which means that they could vote in elections, but they couldn't nominate themselves to be elected as a part of the Abkhazian government in exile. Here probably needs to be mentioned that with the people being displaced in Georgia, we kind of recreated the governmental structures, Abkhazian governmental structures in exile. And when speaking about Abkhazian governmental structures, we just need to remember that the Abkhazia is according to the Georgian constitution, is autonomous republic, right? So it has their own government, etc., with a different structure. So those structures still exist in Georgia, but they had let's say this kind of a mini parliament at the time, they had their representatives in the parliament of Georgia. So those representatives were not replaced when another parliamentary elections would be happening. So in 90s, throughout the 90s, those bunch of people elected in early 90s, they've been sitting in the parliament without any change, right? So which means that the other IDP voters could not kind of nominate themselves to be elected there. But that's just the one side of it. Speaking about the integration, I think after the housing, the livelihood needs would remain like a biggest challenge, which we experienced there in Georgia, because when the government started implementing their housing programs of a different sort, providing the housing under different conditions of a different types rather, into ownership to IDPs, at the early stage, at the early years, it really didn't lead to the real improving of the living conditions, because, okay, people found themselves living in the better places, but again, without the jobs, without income, and without but rather accumulating the bills and relating to utilities and whatever, just to maintain the newly acquired house. Or many of them would sell the house just to get some the financial means to kind of exist, or they would just lock the house or sell the house and get back to their collective centers, the place like you described earlier. Just because in the old place, even the living conditions were quite there, but at least they were better integrated there. So that actually shows that the importance of integration versus having just a good house, right? But that situation also started to be changing after in 2014, the government adopted the strategy on IDP livelihoods, which has this kind of fancy name, from dependence to self-resilience. And there have been significant improvements since then. So now whatever housing is being provided, it's also thought in terms of, would the IDPs getting resettling there, would they have a means to to get their own income, etc., etc. So that's all represent the thinking evolution, and the doing certain things, improving while doing, and making mistakes, learning, changing, and then going on.
Thank you, Dimitri. And that was very a broad description of what was happening around the housing situation for us. I still encourage our participants to ask questions. Anyone from the audience has some question about integration? No questions yet. All right. I would have a question about, you mentioned durable solutions. And when we were discussing this meeting before, you mentioned that there are three ways to look at it. Please take us on that, a path of understanding durable solutions on this matter.
Okay, I'll try to be not that much theoretical and kind of try to illustrate with the practical examples. So let's say in theory, the concept of durable solutions means the condition or state of individuals, of IDPs, when they have no longer displacement-related needs, right? Let me repeat. So when the person who's been displaced have no longer displacement-related needs, he or she is believed to already achieve or being provided, I mean, depends on how you see that, with a durable solution. In fact, there are 3 durable solutions available. So, and it's very much based on the logic and common sense. Yeah, there is no rocket science here. So it's a first and probably the most welcoming one can be return. So when you are displaced at some point from your home or your place of habitual residence, so you wish naturally to return to it at some point, right? Of course, when conditions allows, and that return supposed to be in safety and with dignity, right? So it should be any of those durable solutions should be voluntary. So nobody should enforce them on the people. Otherwise, they are not the solution actually. It's kind of enforcement of somebody's will. So return. The next one is a local integration. So which means that if you've been displaced, for instance, from Abkhazia, and you find your place and you kind of feel that after 29 years, you are really well integrated in somewhere in Tbilisi or in Zugdiri or in Kutaisi or any other part of country, well, okay, you've been a locally integrated, and then good for you. You have no longer displacement related needs, right? I mean, objectively speaking, okay, you have a house, you have a job, you have a equal, same access to the rights and the services as any other neighbor you have who has never been displaced. Yeah. Again, speaking of that, it doesn't mean that you are giving up your, let's say, the property rights or the ownership right, or you keep your a right for restitution of your property you left behind in Abkhazia, right, or in Tskhinvali or wherever outside Georgia. If you happen to be an IDP somewhere else. So that's a different, right? Nobody asked you to kind of give it up, but at least as a matter of fact, living living somewhere outside of your home, you kind of manage to reestablish yourself, either you or you were supported to reestablish yourself in a way that you have no longer displacement related needs. So that's kind of that solution called local integration. And also the third one, which is kind of a link with the second one, it's called resettlement elsewhere in the country. So with regards to IDPs, it's like, for instance, you've been displaced from Abkhazia, you found refuge in Tbilisi, capital, you lived there for a number of years, and then you moved to the other city, like in Zugdidi or Kutaisi again, right? So you kind of settled there properly, and you are, you manage to kind of provide yourself with everything, or again, you've been supported with certain things, you have no longer displacement related needs, and then you may be considered as someone who's been resettled in another part of the country. So that's three basic solutions. Can be seen as those durable solutions, which can be the solution to displacement. Again, one does not exclude the other. You can be integrated locally or resettled somewhere within your own country, but then when a return is possible, you can always exercise that right. You can always return to your place of residence, original place of residence, let's say, and the claim for restitution or claim for compensation of the property you lost there. Our legislation, the law on IDPs from 2014, clearly states that the people will keep their right to restitute their property or get the compensation for their property. Although technically speaking, that part of the law is a bit vague and not like a very technically well elaborated, but as a matter of principle, the state, what is super important here, the state acknowledge your rights, so you can be locally integrated, but then nobody deprives you from the property or from the actually property we're talking about, or from the right to return. Yeah, because it would be very wrong to perceive that either you choose one against the others, right? No. So that's in short like a theory of durable solutions. But then actually to go into details, and let me just name that, right? Because it's not that simple as it sounds. So how one can measure, let me ask the question, how one can measure whether a real durable solution is being achieved or not, right? So there is such an interesting document. I remember you asked me to kind of reflect on that. So which called the Framework on Durable Solutions, which provides 8 major benchmarks, which defines the benchmarks, how one can measure whether the durable solution in a given context for the given group of people or individual have been achieved or not. And those benchmarks, again, are very logical and based on like whether you have a physical security, right? Nobody can persecute you where you stay. Whether you have access to services, again, equal with everyone else in the neighborhood, right? Whether you have a housing, access to the housing, yeah? Whether you have access to livelihoods, if you can sustain yourself. So everything what is needed for just the ordinary human being to function in the society, right? So by measuring that, one can establish that, like, are you really properly integrated, or you're just being given only housing with no means to kind of generate your income? You've been given income opportunities, but no proper housing. You've been given housing, but in the area which has no access to other services. Or you've been given housing, you've been given livelihood, but your rights are discriminated compared to the other, like the other citizens of the country. So this is all need to be, there together to consider that one has reached a durable solution.
So they actually need to like maintain all the benchmarks, meet all the criteria, and then we say that they are like a sustainable, like they meet the durables. Yeah, I kind of followed that thought, but it will be nice to also like see it, like read it through. Thank you, Dimitri. Still questions in the audience? No questions yet? It is tempting to ask questions, so don't
Let me encourage people as well. Yeah, please don't be shy. Try and throw out. There is no wrong or not smart questions per se. I mean, any questions is valued and very much welcome, and they will
Ja, svojho boku Також скажу, що якщо вам зручніше українською, то, будь ласка, не соромтесь задати українською чи написати, я перекладу. I just said that if someone feel more comfortable to ask in Ukrainian language, I can translate.
You can always write your questions in the chat, even in other languages. We will try to translate and answer those questions. Thank you, Nazarii, for motivating our participants. But before we receive other questions, I want you to answer this like a very simple question. What happened when we had this accumulated international aid coming to Georgia, how it affected civil society, how civil society acted locally, what was the outcome of those actions? Just to name it briefly, it would be nice to hear.
Yep. I thank you. I think it's a very good question, which should be kind of also motivating for the IDPs who may happen to listen to this recording. Well, you know, it's always helps when you may be an IDP, you may suffer, you had a loss, you know, like you lost belongings, God forbid, but many lost their family members, etc. So it's so much more like empowering that you had an example of people not just being a passive recipients of the assistance and support, whether from state or from the fellow citizens or from the international community, but also trying to be active and to be, you know, like to get organized together within their communities and try to do something together. So in that sense, the Georgia, I think, is a very good and prominent example of IDP community being super vibrant and super active. There are a lot of IDP founded local initiatives and organizations. We call them the locally organized, we call them community-based organizations, or the local NGOs, local civil society actors, who are actually driving, in most of the time, driving the agenda when it gets to the policy making in Georgia. I have to give a credit here to the IDP ministry, let me call it in a short way because it has a very long and hard to remember, pronounce the name. Currently, it stands as the Ministry of Internally Displaced Persons from Occupied Territories, Social Affairs and Labor in Georgia. So it's like a very long name, right? So let's call it the IDP ministry. So that ministry traditionally used to be quite open and accessible in terms of being engaged into whatever consultations the IDP population or the civil society actors or the international organizations want to have with the ministry, you know, with regards to policy making. So that was like a very good sign, always present there. And we can say that the IDPs could almost always bring their voice to the policymakers, right, to the authorities, to the ministry. So in that sense, IDP community was actually leveraging and influencing to some degree all those policies which have been developed over the years. So would it be a state strategy on IDPs, which actually was unprecedented example of IDP communities engagement on different levels, on the very low local level, on the regional and on the national level, but also the other strategic documents and the policies which have been developed. Again, was not always smooth and easy, was a lot of misunderstanding and kind of the accusation on the both sides, you know, but as a matter of fact, that talk has been happening between the authorities and between the population itself and beneficiary groups, so to say, right? So there are a lot of IDP organizations present and active and trying to do a lot of goods, first of all, for their own constituencies, for IDPs. Those organizations, and I have to also acknowledge here, have been supported a lot by international community, first of all. They were supported to institutionally, they were supported in terms of passing the skills and knowledge on how they can be a better advocates for their own rights and the issues of concern vis-a-vis the government of Georgia. My bad, sorry. Okay. So there were a lot of local initiatives, right? And that kind of support was not only in the one field, right? You can almost name any field, like I don't know, education, legal. I mean, what else? Like the livelihood related, you know, like the income generating programs. So I mean, supporting IDPs as a new homeowners, right? So when a lot of IDP families actually become the owners of their housing, according to the Georgian legislation, they were supposed to create a homeowners association. So there were a lot of initiatives actually. I remember for even like at my time back in Georgia, I was like closely engaged with working with IDP communities to help them create and then help them to kind of the build capacity of those homeowners associations, which are also known as a condominiums, right? The alternative term. So like a lot of different initiatives, which in the end helped us to have very strong and vibrant IDP organizations in Georgia. Not to mention that the civil society in Georgia is actually traditionally quite strong, and there are a lot of non-IDP organizations who are also doing some programming and some, I truly believe, very good stuff for IDP communities in Georgia.
I also wanted to add like a couple of things about programming and working with IDPs and what are the actual actions done. What I remember from the practice, I was always like very curious and searching for the civil society actions after 2008 till 2015, but yeah, forgive me if those numbers are not correct. That is just my observation. Civil society organizations were working like directly with IDPs. It was not about like integrated projects. It was not like inclusive projects. It was just for IDP students, IDP teachers, IDP people in general. So those actions were addressed only to people who were displaced, and right now it is changing. So what I see in education, for example, we have programs where IDPs are presented as well as like the community as whole. They are not like segregated. They're not like just addressed because of their displacement, but it is like understood that everyone, the whole general population, has the right of education. They can like participate equally. So that is like a very encouraging moment, and also like as I see it, it encourages integration process as well. But obviously, yeah, donors still ask you, do you have IDP kids in your project? And if you say yes, then it is likely that they will fund the project, right? But yeah, that is also another story. I also want to follow the discussion about representation, the Abkhazian Ministry in Exile, and we have a couple of schools named Abkhazian schools that we work with. And before 2008, those schools were somehow like divided. They didn't have the name of Abkhazian school. They were accommodated in the school, already existed school buildings. One I remember is located in Senaki. In Senaki, that is like Abkhazian public school number 7. They were like divided into two groups. So Abkhazian pupils, they divided school into two sectors, Georgian and Abkhazian school. And now the whole school is like merged, and it has like one name. So that is also like actions done after 2008, and also like you can clearly see the change of the narrative and the need of integration, how it is like we name it, we say it, but we also like try to integrate in the with the local community, with general population, right? So there are also like a lot of educational programs supporting integration in this sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was just
If
a
you allow
comment,
me
a
to-
long comment.
Yeah, no, I think a very correct comment actually. And just to add on that, what you said very correctly. So those schools, which were for some years in the beginning, like that, as a separate, like a parallel schools, and they're called like Abkhazian schools. And then mostly, as you can imagine, only IDPs from Abkhazia would kind of send their children there in those schools. There were quite a segregation there. But I mean, it was like quite early realized that it shouldn't be like that. So those schools have been integrated into like a education system in Georgia. So they become a part of the schools managed by the Ministry of Education, like centrally. And then, as far as I know, again, I didn't work in that education sector that closely, but as far as I know, there've been quite some efforts made to make sure that it's not only like irrespective how you call the school, the one school shouldn't have the kids from Abkhazia, right? So there was a lot of things made to merge between the displaced and non-displaced population, which I think at the moment it's not even the question, right? But it was an actual some years ago, but now it's been successfully integrated. I would say successfully integrated. Again, I'm sure there might be some challenges there as well. But yeah, I saw the comment from one of the participants, which is a very correct one, reminding us about the existing of the another ministry, which is the State Ministry for Reconciliation and Civic Equality, which is very true. And that's the ministry which is in charge for whatever reconciliation efforts are made to reintegrate the so-called breakaway republics, Abkhazia and the Tskhinvali region, back into Georgian, into kind of Georgia proper. And then, I mean, there've been a lot of initiatives on this regard as well, but just because we were talking about the internal displacement actually, and with the people who experience displacement and about their well-being and the living conditions in Georgia, we kind of didn't get to mention that. While in fact, there are quite a number of state institutions which has in one way or another are engaged with IDPs. Yeah, I mean, we can just name Public Defenders of Georgia, like the Ombudsman Office is working with IDPs quite actively. Yeah, so while they used to only advocate at the parliament level before, I mean, they also have some actual programs in the field, like they provide like legal services to IDPs with certain groups of IDPs. Right? There is a ministries with certain functions towards IDPs, and first of all, it's a Ministry of Regional Development and Infrastructure. So that ministry actually was very actively engaged into whatever housing programs was implemented. They were observing actually the construction works and the building the new housing stocks and all of that. Ministry of Education also for when introducing some preferential treatment for IDP students in the higher educational institutions. So just some examples of trying to engage IDPs into mainstream of society and make their life in displacement like better and easier.
Thank you, Dimitri. I just removed the presentation for a bit, just to give everyone the chance to feel more cozy, to see us and ask questions. Lela, thank you for the question. I just saw in the chat because I was sharing the screen and I had no chance to read your comment. It is also important what you do in IFES. If you want to share, if you have some practice working through educational programs with IDPs, would be nice to hear. Otherwise, anytime you can share that would be appreciated.
While we're waiting for the programs, if you allow me to elaborate, kind of to try to pass on the message, which I think is super important to pass. Why don't we kind of mention a little bit, like, since we're moving towards the ends, right? So to mention what we'll see in the future, right? Or what kind of future we want, apart from, reintegrating the breakaway republics and restoring the sovereignty over those territories, etc., and they enable all those who want to return, right? So we talk about the more like a social aspects here, and not that much about the political aspects. Okay, I see the hands. So okay, I'll keep my question towards the end, or the message, and leave the floor to the question.
Thank you. Nella, floor is yours. We can't hear you, or I can't hear you.
Dira, we see that your microphone is on, so try to speak, or maybe test your microphone via Zoom platform.
No sound. Maybe just like there is a little arrow upwards. You click on that and then select a microphone systems. You can just like test it yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly.
Oh, thank you. Sorry, my internet was unstable, and I was writing in chat, but I will just try to add what was said, because the speaker is absolutely perfectly reviewing all the details. We touched also the schools where IDPs from Abkhazia and from Samachablo, South Ossetia region are teaching, but there are several universities with which we are IFES are working with. Can you hear me? Still problem, yeah. Sorry for that. So I will talk about universities. So with whom we are working, and where there are most IDP students and IDP academics working. This is, first of all, the Sokhum State University, which is in exile from 1993, and it was founded in the 70s. And it has a long history, but there are mostly IDP students who are concentrated in this university, but there are also two universities nearby to the conflict zones, and Gori University, Gori State University, and Zugdi State University. All these universities are state universities and are having very interesting programs and assistance programs for IDP students, and this should be mentioned also. And I think that what we are doing, IFES, is providing civic education at university and at vocational education levels in Georgia. And I think that civic education is the perfect mechanism for transformation of ethnic into civic identities, and this is what we are doing. And if we talk about civic education, it's a very big topic, and I will just highlight that when IDP students and even those students who come from the conflict zones and actually are from there, and they pass the so-called border, they see the difference, how really, in reality, democratic state is functioning, and how the processes, political, social, economic processes are going in their communities, which are under the different regime control, so to say. So in Georgia, we have different regimes, political regimes, and we all hope that someday it will be changed for better and for the benefit for democratic state and more developed and more sustainable state. So thank you very much. This was not a question, sorry. I have no questions, absolutely. And this was just the comment and adding. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Lala, and we appreciate what you do in civic education, especially in academia sphere. It is very important that we have a subject actually about civic education, citizenship education in universities. It is not news that we have the subject at schools already for years, but having a subject that the humanitarian faculty or social science faculty can adopt is amazing and also contributes in the reconciliation and integration process absolutely well. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and thank you for your contribution on that. I also wanted to ask one last question from my side, and then I will let you, Dimitri, to have your final remarks, but we can't let you go out from this meeting without giving some comparison between working in Georgia, working in Syria, and also you mentioned that you worked briefly in Ukraine as well. So would you mind giving us if you have some thoughts, if you found some patterns working in these two regions? Would be very nice to hear. Thank you.
Thank you, Nata. And let me first appreciate comment from our fellow colleague from Georgia, from Lela. I think it was very good addition to the samples of the successful integration when, for instance, Sohum University, which still exists, in exile though, but they do exist and the functions, and it includes not only IDP students, but also non-IDP students as well, as far as I'm aware. So we're not talking here about integrating poor IDPs into, educational system in Georgia, but quite in opposite, actually, the educational institutes, in exile, they can provide the services to the quality and they can be attracted by the non-IDP students as well. So that's a good thing. Okay, back to your question. Yeah, I think we don't have really time here to get into those comparative analysis or even overviews, but maybe just to mention, since most of the participants or the listeners we have from Ukraine, during my short tenure with Ukraine, it was very awesome to observe that the processes and the time we needed to get to the point from displacement to developing the first, a policy documents, in consultations with the different stakeholders, including the IDPs themselves. It took a decade, more than the decade and a half. Yeah, because the first displacement, early 90s, the state strategy for IDPs in Georgia in 2007. While in Ukraine, it was when I was there in 2014 and 15, I think already in 2015, there was a strategy either put in place or is being drafted, right? Again, I might be wrong with the dates, but shortly after the first, the war in Donbass, first active phase, let's put it that way, right? So the Ukraine didn't need that much time to get to. And I mean, as a lawyer myself, I cannot overestimate the importance of having the, a right policies in place before you do anything, right? And the way the IDP community was demobilized in Ukraine itself, and so many IDP organizations have been created right after the first clashes or during the first clashes, and that all these volunteers work being organized there. It was just amazing to observe. Again, let me turn it back to and I just want to to pass this message as someone who comes from Georgia, because what we experience, I mean, we have 29 years of experience. I truly believe that many of the things we did towards now can be done much earlier, but again, better late than never. And then I just want to highlight, it's a wealth of knowledge, right? So accumulated over the 29 years of the good and not very good things being done. And the people like our colleagues from Ukraine can really benefit from sharing some of the examples, you know. And again, here we just mentioned the just very generally about like different programs being done, the change of the attitude from the authorities, you know, the participation of the IDP community themselves into their like creating their well-being. But this is like all can be breaking down into like a very technical discussions on the subject matters, which in case of the interest, I'm sure the Georgia would be, and the colleagues from Georgia would be very happy to kind of keep sharing with our Ukrainian fellows, and not only, but even beyond. But in many sense, those patterns are quite similar in Ukraine and in Georgia, exactly starting from the, you know, like the way the conflict was erupted and kind of developed, ended up with the displacement and how displacement has been dealt. Yeah, I don't know, is it coincidence or is it just somebody's like kind of trying to push this through? But in Ukraine, very similar looking, the IDP law was established, the IDP status was established, the strategy mentioning the integration has been developed. Okay, now it's a different phase now, so it might be all need to be reconsidered shortly. But just to give a compliment and acknowledge that I was truly impressed with the effectiveness, actually, the Ukrainian colleagues, society in general, and the authorities as well, kind of have shown in such a short time to put those, you know, like frameworks in place, and to kind of elaborate the vision, how you guys are going to deal with your internal displacement and the more than 1 million IDPs you had before the conflict, and now like many more millions, unfortunately. So yeah, I wish you nothing but the best. And also, Nata, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity, Nazarii, and wish you nothing but the best. And yeah, hope to have an opportunity to work with you in the future as well. Over.
Thank you so much. I also, like I say, thank you for all the participants who joined and who are watching us online or who will watch us later on. And if anyone has any questions, any remarks, feel free to share with us. We are reachable on social media as well. You can always like drop the message to the organization's chat. And yeah, we promise to be responsive as well. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you, dear Dimitri and dear Nata. It was amazing meeting. It's like more than an hour, but for me passed like 10 minutes. Thank you so much for this. I actually would like to remind that our online meeting was conducted by the NGO Democratic Initiatives Incubator Ukraine within the framework of the project, the response of citizenship education to the challenges of forced migration, which is implemented by the working group of EENCE network, Citizenship Education and Forced Migration, supported by the Federal Agency for Civil Education using funds appropriated by the Federal Foreign Office Germany. Thanks a lot for all our partners for their support. Actually, it's our last meeting for like so far in this series of 7, and we invite everyone to watch other videos if you missed opportunity to join in real time. Also, we are preparing now some visual sketches, scrubbing on this based on this meeting, so you can also read and see some main ideas from them. Thank you a lot, and also we invite all participants who join us here via Zoom platform to fill out our feedback form. It's super important for us because it's how we actually choose our topics for next meetings and can plan our activities better. Thank you a lot for everyone. See you.
Bye.